Well, hello. I'm so happy to see you again, and I hope you're doing well today. I'm excited for another day of decorating, singing, and sharing stories. And for now, why don't we see what's in our Advent calendar for December 9th? Oh, this one looks really yummy. It's a very fancy and very beautiful cupcake. It even smells good. Kind of smells like gingerbread and whipped cream. I wonder how they did that. Well, let's find a nice spot on our tree for it. How about here? Well, that cupcake makes me think of all of the delicious things that we eat at Christmas time. And today, why don't we learn about Christmas in Angola, where they have a very special meal too? Angola is a country in southern Africa on the west coast. Most people in Angola are Christians, so Christmas is a big holiday there, and a lot of people go to church on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. After church on Christmas Day, friends and family get together at each other's houses for a big Christmas meal. Their time together and the meal are a big part of how they celebrate, so many people save up for special Christmas foods. Some of the foods people have are funge or pirão, which are porridges made of cassava flour or cornmeal. This is a picture of pirão with banana. They may also have turkey, fried chicken, fish and vegetable dishes, including this one called kalulu. That one looks really good, I think. For dessert, it's common to eat a cake called bolorei, or king's cake, named after the three kings or wise men. The cake is round, and the dough has fruit and nuts inside, with candied fruit on top. Doesn't that look delicious? Well, one decoration people in Angola might have in their homes is a nativity scene. And if you remember, we talked about nativity scenes before in Argentina, where they were called pesebre in Spanish. Well, in Angola, most people speak Portuguese, and their nativity scene is called a presépio. Presépio. And I bet you're wondering how to wish someone in Angola a Merry Christmas. Well, in Portuguese, you would say Feliz Natal. Do you want to try that with me? Feliz Natal. Natal. Feliz Natal. Ah, very nice. Well, why don't we continue with the song that we've been learning the past 2 days? And if you don't remember any of it, you can go back and watch the videos from yesterday and the day before. That's December 7th and 8th. And as a reminder, the lyrics are, "The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry organ, sweet singing in the choir." So why don't we sing the whole song together? We'll sing it 2 times, okay? Ready? The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry organ, sweet singing in the choir. Again. The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry organ, sweet singing in the choir. Very nice. Well, tomorrow we are going to review that song again and Deck the Halls, which we learned a few days ago. But for now, It's time for our story of the day. And this one comes from a longer book called A Little Princess, which was written by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I really enjoy this book. I would encourage you to read it if you never have. But in case you haven't read it, it's about the things that happened to Sarah Crewe while she was at Miss Minchin's boarding school in England. Before she went there, she lived in India with her father, who loved her very much. He was very wealthy and gave her a lot of nice things, and because of this, some people called her a princess. Sarah was a kind girl and very generous. She was also very intelligent and imaginative. Well, her 11th birthday came, and it was a terrible day. She found out that her father had died and that he had also lost all of his money. She was now poor, and Miss Minchin became very cruel to her. She made Sarah work as a servant, and Sarah had to leave all of her things behind, except for one doll and one set of old clothes. She was sent from her luxurious rooms up to a miserable space in the cold attic, next to Becky, a servant who was treated even worse than Sarah, but who Sarah had always been kind to, and they became even better friends. Fortunately, Sarah's imagination and desire to be a kind and benevolent princess, despite her difficult circumstances, helped her survive the hard times. She tells Becky stories about what she imagines, which they both enjoy. Chapter 13, One of the Populace. The winter was a wretched one. There were days on which Sarah tramped through snow when she went on her errands. There were worse days when the snow melted and combined itself with mud to form slush. There were others when the fog was so thick that the lamps in the streets were lighted all day, and London looked as it had looked the afternoon several years ago, when the cab had driven through the thoroughfares with Sarah tucked up on its seat, leaning against her father's shoulder. On such days, the windows of the house of the large family, that's the neighbors, always looked delightfully cozy and alluring, and the study in which the Indian gentleman sat glowed with warmth and rich color. But the attic was dismal beyond words. There were no longer sunsets and sunrises to look at, and scarcely ever any stars, it seemed to Sarah. The clouds hung low over the skylight, and were either gray or mud color, or dropping heavy rain. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even when there was no special fog, the daylight was at an end. If it was necessary to go to her attic for anything, Sarah was obliged to light a candle. The women in the kitchen were depressed, and that made them more ill-tempered than ever. Becky was driven like a little slave. "'Twa'n't for you, miss," she said hoarsely to Sarah one night when she had crept into the attic. "'Twa'n't for you in the Bastille, and being the prisoner in the next cell. I should die. That there does seem real now, doesn't it? The missus is more like the head jailer every day she lives. I can just see them big keys you says she carries. The cook, she's like one of the under jailers. Oh, tell me some more, please, miss. Tell me about the subterranean passage we've dug under the walls." "I'll tell you something warmer," shivered Sarah. "Get your coverlet and wrap it around you, and I'll get mine, and we'll huddle it close together on the bed, and I'll tell you about the tropical forest where the Indian gentleman's monkey used to live. When I see him sitting on the table near the window and looking out into the street with that mournful expression, I always feel sure he's thinking about the tropical forest where he used to swing by his tail from coconut trees. I wonder who caught him, and if he left a family behind who depended on him for coconuts." "That is warmer, miss," said Becky gratefully. "But someways even the Bastille is sort of heating when you gets to telling about it." "That is because it makes you think of something else," said Sarah, wrapping the coverlet round her until only her small dark face was to be seen looking out of it. "I've noticed this. What you have to do with your mind when your body is miserable is to make it think of something else. "Can you do that, miss?" faltered Becky, regarding her with admiring eyes. Sarah knitted her brows for a moment. "Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't," she said stoutly. "But when I can, I'm all right. And what I believe is that we always could if we practiced enough. And I've been practicing a good deal lately, and it's beginning to be easier than it used to be. When things are horrible, just horrible, I think as hard as ever I can of being a princess. I say to myself, I am a princess, and I am a fairy one, and because I'm a fairy, nothing can hurt me or make me uncomfortable. You don't know how it makes you forget," with a laugh. She had many opportunities of making her mind think of something else, and many opportunities of proving to herself whether or not she was a princess. But one of the strongest tests she ever was put to came on a certain dreadful day, which she often thought afterwards would never quite fade out of her memory, even in the years to come. For several days, it had rained continuously. The streets were chilly and sloppy and full of dreary, cold mist. There was mud everywhere, sticky London mud, and over everything the pall of drizzle and fog. Of course, there were several long and tiresome errands to be done. There always were on days like this. And Sarah was sent out again and again until her shabby clothes were damp through. The absurd old feathers on her forlorn hat were more draggled and absurd than ever, and her downtrodden shoes were so wet that they could not hold any more water. Added to this, she had been deprived of her dinner because Miss Minchin had chosen to punish her. She was so cold and hungry and tired that her face began to have a pinched look, and now and then some kind-hearted person passing her in the street glanced at her with sudden sympathy. But she did not know that. She hurried on, trying to make her mind think of something else. It was really very necessary. Her way of doing it was to pretend and suppose with all the strength that was left in her. But really, this time it was harder than she had ever found it, and once or twice she thought it almost made her feel more cold and hungry instead of less so. But she persevered obstinately, and as the muddy water squelched through her broken shoes and the wind seemed trying to drag her thin jacket from her, she talked to herself as she walked, though she did not speak aloud or even move her lips. "Suppose I had dry clothes on," she thought. "Suppose I had good shoes and a long thick coat and merino stockings and a whole umbrella, and suppose just when I was near a baker's where they sold hot buns, I should find sixpence, which belonged to nobody. Suppose, if I did, I should go into the shop and buy 6 of the hottest buns and eat them all without stopping." Some very odd things happen in this world sometimes. It certainly was an odd thing that happened to Sarah. She had to cross the street just when she was saying this to herself. The mud was dreadful. She almost had to wade. She picked her way carefully as she could, but she could not save herself much. Only, in picking her way, she had to look down at her feet and the mud. And in looking down, just as she reached the pavement, she saw something shining in the gutter. It was actually a piece of silver, a tiny piece trodden upon by many feet, but still with spirit enough left to shine a little. Not quite a sixpence, but the next thing to it, a 4-penny piece. In 1 second, it was in her cold little red and blue hand. "Oh," she gasped, "it is true! It is true!" And then, if you will believe me, she looked straight at the shop directly facing her. And it was a baker's shop, and a cheerful, stout, motherly woman with rosy cheeks was putting into the window a tray of delicious, newly baked hot buns, fresh from the oven. Large, plump, shiny buns with currants in them. It almost made Sarah feel faint for a few seconds. The shock and the sight of the buns and the delightful odors of warm bread floating up through the baker's cellar window. She knew she need not hesitate to use the little piece of money. It had evidently been lying in the mud for some time, and its owner was completely lost in the stream of passing people who crowded and jostled each other all day long. But I'll go and ask the baker woman if she has lost anything, she said to herself rather faintly. So she crossed the pavement and put her wet foot on the step. As she did so, she saw something that made her stop. It was a little figure, more forlorn even than herself, a little figure which was not much more than a bundle of rags, from which small, bare, red, muddy feet peeped out, only because the rags with which their owner was trying to cover them were not long enough. Above the rags appeared a shock head of tangled hair and a dirty face with big, hollow, hungry eyes. Sarah knew they were hungry eyes the moment she saw them, and she felt a sudden sympathy. This, she said to herself with a little sigh, is one of the populace, and she is hungrier than I am. Well, on that note, we're going to end our story for today, but I hope you'll come back to find out what happens to Sarah and to the little girl. Why don't we end our time together with another Christmas carol? And this one is called It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. And if you know it, why don't you join me? It came upon a midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch their harps of gold. Peace on the earth, goodwill to men, from heaven's all gracious King. The world in solemn stillness lay, to hear the angels sing. Thank you so much for coming back again today. I hope that you have a really good day until I see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.